Hi guys, welcome back for a new week. This week we are going to be looking at the Pax Romana, which translates to Peace of Rome. This is going to be Rome's golden age. So it starts with the reign of Augustus, who rules for 41 years. Remember, Augustus used to be Octavian. He won the Civil War that ends the second triumvirate with Mark Antony. And that starts the success of the Roman Empire. And this Roman peace will last from the start of his reign in 27 BC until 180 AD, kind of the ends of the good emperors that some of you looked at last week. So the Pax Romana, it's the peace of Rome, 7 years where there's no invasions of Rome. They grow very wealthy and they start to expand their territory dramatically. All right, so there's going to be some major achievements that provide the foundation for success. The first is that the empire has a strong centralized government that's able to consolidate power under one person with the emperor. And that provides a stable condition for trade. That provides a way for communications to travel quickly throughout the empire. The empire protects the territories it controls. They govern those individual provinces. You can see kind of the labels of the major Roman provinces on this map. They administer the general Roman law, but they also allow for common law. So they blend in local customs and traditions with the main body of Roman law. They also allow conquered people to become citizens. They pay taxes. And as long as they accept that they have to pay those taxes, they are not directly controlled by the Roman Empire. So Rome really benefits from a continuous tax foundation, tax revenue. And then finally, Romans are going to make very significant achievements in terms of architecture, engineering, which we'll look at later this week, and then the arts. This really will be a springboard for the success of the Pax Romana. Roman architecture continues the legacy left by the earlier architects of the Greek world, just like with the Roman religion, borrowing from the Greeks. By borrowing, I mean taking. Romans do the same thing with architecture. They take the idea of columns, of symmetry, of squares, of rectangles, of triangles as the foundations of building blocks, haha, pun intended, of architecture, and they add to it. They create the arch that has a keystone. You can see here how those arches are built. Each of those blocks is angled, so it builds up to the center, and then the keystone is angled on both sides. So the weight is distributed on both sides. They also create an arch. We'll talk about the Pantheon in just a second. And the Romans discover concrete. And the Roman mixture of concrete has not changed much. You can still make concrete using the Roman recipe. It's just about as good as modern day concrete, which blows my mind. So one example of Roman architecture and engineering, which we'll look at more later this week, is the Colosseum. The Colosseum in Rome is the most notable Roman amphitheater or stadium, but in every city that they conquered, in every region, Rome built a Colosseum-like structure for games, for different events that we looked at in past weeks. If you're ever in Rome, you can go check out the Roman, it's called the Flavian Amphitheater. It's the largest example, but it's not one of the most preserved. The most preserved is actually in the city of Verona, which is north of Rome. Verona, you might know them from Romeo and Juliet, my fair Verona. But the Verona Amphitheater is actually still used. When I was in Italy a couple summers ago, they actually were performing an opera in the amphitheater, and you could sit on the blocks of Roman marble that were still there. It just was incredible. But the Colosseum was used for a lot of different things, as we've seen in previous weeks. They used to flood this area. Here's the areas underneath that could have been used to help flood it. They were used for animals to store them. But if we zoom in over here, you can actually still see some of the marble Most of the marble from the Colosseum was taken down during the Renaissance in the 1500s and built into other buildings. Um, Another example of Roman architecture is the Forum. This is the center of government, and you can still walk through it. We see arches in one of the main government buildings. You can see arches here. Roman concrete helps all of this stay together. And you can kind of walk among these different temples, round buildings with domes that the Romans built in the Forum. There's a view, this is where the emperor would have lived. Up top, it's called the Palatine Hill. It's one of Rome's 7 hills. It looks down over the Forum here in the foreground, and then the Colosseum in the background. And this right here would have been the Via Sacra. This is the most sacred road in all of Rome that would have led up to the temples all throughout the Forum. Pantheon, this was built and it is the first example of a domed building. You can see some of it up here. This is very Roman. We have Roman columns. We have Corinthian columns that they stole from the Greeks. We can see the triangles. We can see the rectangles. This was built as a church to many different gods. All of the gods of the city of Rome, Pantheon, okay, many gods. But the reason this building is important is because this is the first and largest dome that the Romans built. And it's really an engineering marvel because all of the weight is distributed down the sides of the dome. There's no center support. If you see right here, that's actually the sky. Okay, this is called the oculus. It's open to the elements. When I was here the first time, it was pouring rain. And if you didn't know, marble is really slippery when it's wet. Totally wiped out in the middle of the Pantheon. But it's just a beautiful building. You can still see the original Roman brickwork. The building has been modified several times. It became a Catholic church. So a lot of it was changed, but this is all marble that the Romans added. The dome part is still what it would have looked like in ancient Rome. Not much else is the same, but it's a beautiful building if you ever have a chance to go. Another key part of the Pax Romana is art. Again, this is an area where the Romans borrowed from the Greeks. So they're going to kind of blend the idealized perfection of the Greeks with this greater aspiration for realism. And they also still have an ideal, but Romans are much more buff in their sculptures. The Greeks are kind of like skinny and athletic, and then the Romans are jacked, okay? So that's how you can kind of tell the difference between Greek and Roman sculptures. If it's super buff, it's Roman. If it's kind of athletic-y, it's Greek. But another key art is mosaics. So these are small pieces of colored glass, which the Romans were known for, or stone, or other materials. And the Romans would arrange them in really beautiful patterns. This is a floor, a braided floor from a Roman household of a patrician. And this is a mosaic of Alexander the Great that the Romans built. They really viewed him as a leader in building an empire, and they tried to model a lot of what they did based on what he did in terms of military strategy. Sculpture was also important. Emperors always had sculptures made of them. This is me between a pair of Caesars. Ha ha, history joke. It would have fallen flat in class too. But I've got Julius Caesar and Augustus here on each of my shoulders. Next major point of engineering success is the aqueducts. As Rome expands, they start to develop large urban centers or cities, and those cities need to have water. So the aqueducts are massive structures to carry fresh water from the countryside into the urban centers. That was often miles away from the nearest water source. So they use the arch to span rivers, to span ravines. This is one of the best examples of a Roman aqueduct in France. They are no longer used because what carried the water was lined with lead. Okay, so kind of poisonous, not something I'd really want to be drinking out of still, is lead pipes. okay? But the aqueducts brought water into the cities, and this is what allowed Rome to have major cities throughout their empire, and provided clean, fresh drinking water for the citizens. Throughout the empire, Rome continues its expansion of roads. So wherever they conquer, they build roads. Okay, it's where the phrase "all roads lead to Rome" comes from. They're very straight. They all use the same building method. They level the ground. They put a layer of gravel or sand and then gravel, and then they lay blocks and cover that in with sand. It's very similar to how roads are still built today, or sidewalks. If you have like pavers around your pool, this is the same method that the Romans used that we still use today when we lay those paving blocks. But roads, not only are they engineering marvels, they're also marvels for culture. Trade happens easily. It allows people and their ideas to travel very quickly throughout the Roman Empire. We saw that with the spread of Christianity in past weeks. It also allowed the military to travel quickly. And you can still walk on these roads today. They were well worn. You can see here, this is a main road in Rome. It still has the wagon tracks because so many people travel these networks of roads that span the entire empire. Even today in England, some of the major highways in the country were built alongside Roman roads because that became the main form of transportation and travel throughout these territories. Someday, when you take 10th grade history, you'll learn about the next empire that spreads across the southern part, the Islamic Empire. And this road that the Romans built allowed for that expansion. And today, if it wasn't politically unsafe, there's actually a hiking trail that you can take across northern Africa following the Roman road. And someday I would love to do that, but I also like not dying. Also, we have literature that expands. Remember, Latin is the language of the Roman Empire, so ideas written down spread very quickly and can reach a lot of people. Two main Roman authors. There's a lot that we could talk about. There's a lot of historians, but we're going to look just at Virgil and Cicero. So Virgil is the greatest Roman poet. He writes before the Pax Romana, but he is very influential during the early years of Augustus's time in power. He writes a book called the Aeneid, which tells the story of Rome's legendary founder, Romulus and Remus. We looked at that when we started the Roman Republic. And his poems, both in the Aeneid and his other writings, really proclaim Rome's mission to civilize the world. He uses writing as a way to support Rome's expansion. And he says they can do all because they think they can. And that really is a good philosophy for the expansion of the Roman Empire. Next and last, we have Cicero. Cicero is a statesman and a politician. He's a lawyer, and he writes extensive books about philosophy and government, and he writes rhetoric, which is kind of like an argument that you're writing down. You're proving your argument through writing, kind of like a debate. But Cicero's writings are more important for their impact. Cicero is read widely by Roman emperors. Augustus learned Cicero, and we have several other sources that talk about the copies of Cicero that Augustus had in his own library. So he was a very important author for determining Rome's government during their empire. And he said, more is lost by indecision than wrong decision. Indecision is the thief of opportunity. It will steal you blind. So kind of recapping before we end this lecture here, the foundation of Pax Romana will provide some of the greatest contributions to Western society that still influence us today. And this is really the legacy of Rome. One is Romance languages. After Rome collapses, Latin that spread throughout Europe is going to be the foundation of Italian, Spanish, French, Portuguese, Romanian, as Latin blends with local languages. The Republican form of government that carries into the empire still influences the United States today. Christianity spreads during the Roman Empire, and it's going to be one of the world's main religions. The tensions between social classes continue into the Roman Empire and continue to determine social and political issues even today. That gap between the rich and the poor and the debate between the 1% and everybody else still is present in society, just like it was in ancient Rome. The legacy of art and architecture, which we're going to continue looking at, stays important in the world. And then finally, inventions, which we'll look at more this week. We already talked about concrete, the dome in architecture, the road building methods. So the Pax Romana really is a golden age. It's a high point of civilization, not only for Rome, but also for its legacy, in that it's going to carry these ideas throughout this huge territory that the Romans conquer. Trade brings wealth, wealth brings art. The military is dominant because of the Greeks. The population of the city at Rome at one point reaches over 1 million people before it collapses. So you just have this really great, successful empire. And what must go up also must come down. And when the Roman Empire collapses in the 5th century, which is actually where you start 10th grade history, Rome is going to have a very hard fall because they come from such this peak of development during the Pax Romana. So if you have questions, make sure you shoot me an email. I love hearing from you guys as we are wrapping up our year together. At this time, make sure you head over to Moodle to complete the lecture quiz. Everything you need for the whole week is there. As always, our favorite Latin phrase, carpe diem.